Will do. Cool.
Okay.
All right. Well, we are now on air. So thank you for all of you who are tuning in and joining us, or who might be joining this or watching this later on. Today, we are very pleased to have Ms. Jacqueline Homan. She will be talking about her path to F# and what she finds useful about F#, and also be demonstrating some F# with her NGO Fraudbuster application. Jacqueline is a consultant. She is currently available for hire. So if you're looking for an F# developer, please reach out to Jacqueline. She's also a Pluralsight author and software engineer who specializes in the impossible, like tank flying, combinatorics, and operations research. Her tools of choice are F# and Ruby. Jacqueline has been in the IT field since 2013, mostly working on projects centered on optimization and data analysis. Her teammates once dubbed her Captain Calculus, and you can follow her on Twitter at Jacqueline Homan. That's JACQUELINEHOMAN. So Jacqueline, thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you. And I think kind of what you had presented and proposed was talking about, like, you started with Ruby. A colleague of yours mentioned functional programming in F#. You got into that, and you've gotten really excited about F#. And I think something that would be cool to talk about is how did you get into F#? What are some really cool things you've done with it, and how has that helped you working on this application that you're building, NGO Fraudbuster? And maybe talk about a little bit about that application as well.
Okay. Well, I started learning programming in Ruby on Rails. I started out in Rails Girls, actually. And we did pretty neat things, like we made Uber for Cats apps and stuff like that. But that gets old. And there's not a lot, there's a lot of real world problems that a purely object-oriented programming language is more unwieldy to work with for solving. And Brian Eds once gave a talk, and I remember this stood out in my mind, where he said that in object-oriented programming, you're living in the kingdom of nouns. But in functional programming, you're living in the kingdom of verbs. And if you think about that, that makes so much sense, because when we talk about things like analyzing or solving a problem, let's say, for example, safety at grade level railway crossings. Okay, we're talking about the act of people stopping their cars, waiting for the gates to come down or go back up. That's a whole lot of doing. There's a process.
It's 12 o'clock.
Your car approaches the tracks. The gates come down. The train goes by, And the same goes for other problems in life too. What got me in F# was a friend of mine who's a senior developer, and he's a Haskeller. He's a Haskell dev. His name is Evan, and he's really brilliant. He saw that just 3 months into learning programming after graduating from the Rails Girls Summer of Code, an online jobber gave me a small, task to do for pay, of course. And that was to write a parser to deal with a really huge YAML file that had been clobbered. It was YAML files mushed up inside of a YAML file. And she didn't know Ruby, but she knew that I did. And she said, I know that Ruby has this gem that specifically deals with parsing YAML files. Can you do this for me? It should only take an afternoon. And I said, sure. Well, what happened was it didn't work too well, because the Nokogiri gem, which is what Ruby uses to parse YAML files, doesn't do too well on files that are less than perfect. And a clobbered YAML file is, something that it didn't work on. So I needed to have something else that was not in my toolbox. So I was asking senior Ruby developers, hey, what do I do about this? Nokogiri is choking on it. And I've had people tell me, well, the file is too damaged. You have to hand it back to the jobber and tell her to reassemble it. And I thought to myself, wait a minute. If the person that gave me this task to do has to take it apart to reassemble it, that is in effect what parsing is. And I thought, oh, this is crazy. So Evan, who is not a Ruby developer, he reached out to me and he said, hey, Jay, come here a minute. Let me show you this. You're going to love this. So I'm going to show you this language called F#. And this is exactly what we built. He walked me through building this parser to deal with the clobbered YAML file. And I don't know, can you see my screen?
Not yet. You haven't shared it again.
Okay. So here is, I call it the Adrienne File Problem, because Adrien was the name of the jobber who gave me the specific task. And this is what, and this was my first time ever seeing the syntax of F#, ever seeing what the language looked like. And when Evan said to me, now what is the problem that you have to do? And I said, well, I need to pull out certain Ruby classes, which are YAML objects that are in this mushed up file that's all mushed together like a big pepperoni ball. And I have to extract several of these classes and, you know, rewrite them into XML files, separate XML files, one for events, one for news posts, and one for assets. And I said, and this is how this has to be done. I have to extract these out of a set of other things that are in this pile of data. So what I was describing was what Brian has called, you know, verbs. What am I doing? I'm extracting pieces of data or objects that needed to be pulled out and needed to be rewritten. Evan said, hey, I got this tool. And he showed me this, and this is the parser we wrote, and here's the code, and I'm going to slowly scroll down the screen so you can see. He showed me, you know, the types, that everything that I described verbally was able to be expressed like this in F#. You know, these are the objects that I had to pull out of that clobbered file. And here is where I saw pattern matching and how matching was used to grab those objects in that clobbered YAML file and pull them out. And as you get down here further in the code, you know, you can see it reads just as exactly how I verbalized it. They were pulling this out and we're rewriting it to 3 other separate XML files. And we're representing them as nodes, as XML nodes in those files. And right here is the crux of it. And that's this function which then takes the parsed, you know, stuff and puts it into the XML documents. And that was the code. And when I saw that, I knew that if F# could handle a situation like that if I could use this language, which I mean, this impressed me. All I'd ever seen before was Ruby. So, you know, this impressed me, you know, I was really impressed. And I thought, you know, if I could do this with a clobbered YAML file that everybody else said, you won't be able to do that. You won't be able to work with this file. And here, with the correct tool, I most certainly was able to work with the file. I thought, you know, this is really a great tool for what I really wanted to do, that Ruby is very difficult to work with to do what I really wanted to do. And that was to build this project. I initially called it the NGO Fraudbuster. Other people have told me I should call it Jackhammer. Whatever. It's an app that basically what it does is it gathers raw data. And it gathers raw data based on user or responder input to the application, to the program. And each point—
Jacqueline, real fast, do you mind explaining what an NGO is?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, an NGO is a non-government organization, i.e. a charity, a private charity, or a faith-based charity, or a non-faith-based charity. It can be any one, but it's a charity. They're a tax-exempt, non-profit charity. And that's pretty much what is the safety net for destitute survivors of human trafficking in the United States, where there is no safety net for anybody who has no income and no job and who's unemployable. So I saw that it was a real problem when there was a lot of fraud going on, where there are people that are not exactly who they say they are, that, you know, some of these people had really, you know, they were really bad actors. And they had spun up these NGOs that all you have to do is have $400 to file with the IRS to file for an EIN as a 5013C nonprofit, and you can say, oh yes, I'm a faith-based charity, or I'm a charity that works with disaster relief or human trafficking victims, or cancer victims, or, you know, and the list goes on. And there's not a whole lot of oversight. We have sites like Charity Navigator and GuideStar, but those sites are basically, what they do is they present the information that the charities themselves are saying about themselves. And, you know, obviously they're not going to give themselves a black eye, okay? They're not going to say, oh yes, you know, we're just riding this gravy train to create, you know, an income stream for ourselves. They don't do that. And most people don't think about it, because when you see these high-powered charity drives, these fundraising drives, you know, people automatically they want to do good, and they want to help, and they'll donate, and they won't think, oh gee, this might not be an organization that's on the up and up. And it really causes problems for the organizations that are legit. And it also causes problems where the people that are being served are not being helped. And it's literally a life or death situation in the case of survivors of human trafficking. So when I saw how F# could extract data and write new data for a clobbered YAML file that everybody else said, oh, this can't be done, I thought, you know what? This is the tool that can be used to to gather raw data and make it available to other developers, as well as to package and sort and analyze that data for academics and policymakers and the like, to deal with the problem of a lot of these shifty NGOs that are actually getting federal money from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services under the pretext of helping poor trafficking victims that are in a state of crisis, that, you know, are literally, you know, in life or death situations, and they're not being accountable for the money they're receiving, not just to the, you know, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, but to public people like maybe yourself, or people that you work with that might donate to one of those charities, thinking, oh gee, you know, I'm helping some poor trafficking survivors get helped. And, you know, you have no way of knowing that, well, no, that's not what's happening, because they turn away 98% of the victims, and God knows what they blow the money on. And that's a big problem.
Oh, sorry about that. And this is an application you're actively developing, and you have not a Kickstarter, but a GoFundMe page for this application. Is that correct?
Yes, I do. And I started this application a mere 2 weeks after Evan first showed me how to write that parser for the Adrienne File Problem. And then I got pulled away from it because I had to take what work I could get to, you know, pay the bills and keep the lights on. And that was doing, you know, Ruby tutorials and working for code mentors and dealing with, you know, people, you know, calling in and wanting on-demand help from a Ruby expert, you know, to help them set up their dev environment and yada, yada, yada. So for many months, I didn't get a chance to come back to this. You know, I did get it started, and it will eventually be a full-blown web app. I plan to use Web Sharper. I didn't get to try it out yet, but from what I've read about it and have been looking at, it looks like it would be the best fit. You know, this console app will, you know, become a full-blown web app that will be accessible on cross-platform. That means you can get it on your laptop, your desktop, your smartphone, or your not-so-smartphone, depending on how you look at it. And people will be able to, you know, to go and, you know, that and report what, you know, the outcomes were. What this app does is it collects the data on the outcomes of their requests for help. And the way I whiteboarded this out, you can see in my .NET tutorial on Pluralsight, I actually uploaded the Adobe PDF files that actually shows the data represented in a chart. And it's very complex, because what I did was I sat down and I drew out the entire process from soup to nuts. What happens when a poor trafficking victim calls one of these NGOs and tries to get help, and what the outcomes are, and what you know, what the unmet needs were that were not met. And each one of those points on those PDF charts that I made represents a data point. Taking that and going from there, you get this. This is my types file. This is before I even knew what the term domain-driven development was. But basically, the way Evan explained it to me was that the way you set up your types is the way that you will direct the flow of your app. And since the app is, you know, is intended to work with getting data, raw data, and write it to a file or to a database, and make that data, you know, available through APIs, you know, to other developers. Having a very strongly typed system was important. So you can see here that this is the representation in my types file of what you see when you go to my Pluralsight article, where I show you the drawings on those PDF charts. And you can see that this is what happens. Well, you know, the caller reporting to the app says, well, you know, I'm either a victim, a survivor, or an advocate. Survivor is somebody who's been, you know, who has been exited from human trafficking for quite a few years. A victim is somebody who's just trying to get out of it, like right now. And an advocate is, of course, a professional that works with this population. And the NGO types that are being recorded are, you know, basically what type of NGO the victim was referred to. Polaris has the 1-800 number. That is the anti-trafficking number. All calls requesting help regarding the problem of human trafficking go through Polaris. They get routed through their 1-800 number, and Polaris operators then direct the caller to different NGOs in their area, depending on whether they're in Utah or Pennsylvania or Austin, Texas, or New York City, or any other place in the world, because Polaris is international. So when a caller calls in and they're directed and they're referred, the information that Polaris gives them and as referrals is, well, in your area, there's this or that anti-trafficking NGO that will help you. And why this is important is because oftentimes victims of human trafficking have criminal records that are deeply stigmatizing as a direct result of having been trafficked. And regular homeless shelters will not take them in because if you have a prostitution record, you're automatically a sex offender. And that means you don't get accepted into a shelter where there's children. So you can imagine the problems this poses for victims of this crime who have, you know, records like that. So the anti-trafficking NGOs that are specifically supposed to help that population, they are listed in Polaris's database as in a charity that supposedly works with or helps this demographic that can't get help anywhere else. You know, so when a victim or a survivor calls and they say, you know, I'm, you know, this such and such and such need help, and they're referred, the outcomes of those requests for help being recorded will help deal with the problem of some of the people that are on the not so up and up, that are really not helping this demographic, and that are actually taking money away from organizations that are doing good and taking money away from legitimate crime victims, to be honest with you. So what this app does, you know, is it doesn't cure the whole problem, because as a software engineer, I deal with problems that are information related. I can't digitize housing. I can't digitize food. I can't digitize money. Well, with Bitcoin, I probably could digitize money. But I can work with information to solve some of these other problems. And I saw that with a language that is strongly typed and that allows me to operate in the kingdom of verbs, to tip of the hat to Brian Eds. I could actually produce a solution that puts a heck of a dent in solving part of this problem for everybody as a necessary you know, thing. So you can see here, looking at the types, all those nodes on those charts are represented. The process of being referred to the next NGO, the outcomes of the help requests, and what those requests are. And you go over here and you look at the functions, and you can see this is modeled after the idea of a call tree, right? Which pretty much, you know, it is. And you can see right here, the functions, there's a lot of recursion going on because of the types that dictate the flow of the app. What happens at each stage? You know, the caller is reporting, and the information that's being gathered is based on, you know, what the data points represented by the types call for. Okay, and that's what you see here. And here I got to play with something that I thought was really cool. My third week into learning F#. I don't know why I thought this was cool, but I did. I thought, ooh, neat, set theory. Hello, I have a math degree, so set theory is kind of it just tickled me, and I thought this was so cool. And I got to use this set of requested needs in this function here, which are these are the set of requested needs that that survivors and victims are requesting. You know, and that's being, you know, recorded to a file. That's being recorded to a data, you know. It's raw data that's being taken in, as is whether or not anybody's followed up, or, you know, whether they were offered the wrong help or not helped at all, or whether they exhausted all options and still weren't helped. And to see this in action, this is really cool. Oh no, now Z-Shell wants to check for updates. Sorry about that. Nice timing, Z-Shell. Okay, well, while that does that, I'll show everybody the other file. What I like to do is I like to keep my types separate from my constructor functions, which that's what's in this file, which is called Terminal Builder. This is where, you know, the information is being taken in. A lot of these functions are what you would call constructor functions. They're taken from the types. And in the main F# file, the program.fs, this is where all the deconstructors are going. So I like to keep things separate that way, so that way it's a lot easier to read through the code, and you can see who is being called from where. It's a lot easier to go in, I think, and modify your code or refactor your code when you know that, oh, gee, all my constructors are located in Terminal Builder. All my types are located in call tree. All my deconstructors are located here in program. And, you know, that's my preference. Other people might have different preferences, but that was my preference. And you can see here at entry point, the order of which, you know, these functions are called is right here. This is the entry point of the application.
Hey, Jacqueline, it sounds like you're using constructor and deconstructor differently than I've heard them used before. Can you describe them a little bit more as to like what those different constructors and deconstructors are doing?
I don't know if I have the technical vocabulary to do that because I'm still quite new to computer programming.
Oh, that's fine. I was just curious, like, if you could describe more like what they're actually doing. It looked like the deconstructors were maybe doing more like breaking down inputs into finer grained outputs or something to print out, and that the constructors looked like they were taking in more like raw data and creating the instances of things.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, that would be correct. I mean, like I said, you have to bear with me because I don't have a computer science degree or a computer science vocabulary. I picked up a lot, but, you know, I'm coming from a background of having a degree in pure math, which that means that you're to think Dr. John Nash writing proofs about Riemann sums on the windows at Princeton. It's like that. So there's different terminology sometimes. So I might know something by a different name. But basically what is going on is the way I'm using constructors and deconstructors is in the gathering and parsing and sorting of the data. Sorting and outputting and rewriting it. Because down here at the end, the last functions that are called, we are serializing this data. We are serializing this and writing it to JSON files. Now this will later be turned into a database. But I wanted to try it out in JSON first because most people that deal with web apps or deal with you know, apps that pull down things from the internet, they want to pull down pretty looking JavaScripty looking data files, and that's kind of what JSON is. JSON is really JavaScript. They don't want to look at XML. They don't want to look at plain text. They want to see nice, pretty little JSON objects that they can then pull into their own applications to work with. So in trying this out this way, I thought it was pretty important to have, you know, the constructors and the deconstructors used in that way. And this is what we'll go through this, and I'll show you exactly what happens, you know, on the test file, on the test JSON file that this generates, and you can see how this information is then written to a file that anybody will then be able to pull out and use. And when I say anybody, I mean, you know, the developers. So we're going to go through this real quick, a quick scenario of this. Survivor support assistance, unmet needs. Well, let's see, legal, medical, dental, housing, income support, skills training, Job placement. And not done. And what help did they provide? Well, they referred to another NGO. And what kind of NGO were you referred to? General Survivor Aid. And you were referred to Shared Hope. And did anyone follow up? Well, no. And what help did you get? Referred to another NGO. You were not helped, but you were referred to another NGO. And what kind of NGO were you referred to? An emergency homeless shelter. This is actually based on a real case, by the way. Salvation Army turned the girl away. This was out in Tucson, Arizona. They turned her away after, you know, she had been referred to them. 14 years old. Let's see. No, wait. I got confused here. Let's see. There we go. Not helped and all options were exhausted. Okay. And this is annoying. I apologize to everybody for this, but this is a quirk with Xamarin and Mac. It doesn't happen to every Mac user, but it does happen to sometimes. It's okay if you see that. It still compiles. It's just annoying. And this is how you can see the output. This is my desk check. When people talk about testing, this is how I test. Did the app do what it was supposed to do? Is it compiling? Is it doing what it's supposed to? Yep, it's doing that. So you can see all that information that was captured by the constructors, got put out by the deconstructors. And now we're going to pop open another terminal. And we're going to go into the come on, close up. Come on, stop that. Behave yourself. Thank you. Yes, Seashell, I know you want to update. Okay. Let's see.
So if I might make a comment, it actually was interesting that you mentioned you were thinking about making this a web application. But the flow you actually have defined looks like it would fit well into like a text or an SMS-based application where it sends out a question and then they get a follow-up text based on things like that. Is that something you've also considered, or is it are you planning on primarily looking at building a web application instead?
Well, I want something that the people that are the most greatly impacted by this will have access to be able to report to. We're talking about a population that, you know, the only thing they might have is their Obama phone. Can they access this on their Obama phone? Well, if it's cross-platform, you betcha. You know, so I don't know if they'd be able to access it in a public library, which does restrict access to a lot of web apps. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but if you go to a public library to use their computers, they actually have a very strong filtering system where there's a lot of web apps that you're not able to access. And I wouldn't want something like this to be inaccessible. Here we can see the JSON file. I'm just going to cat this so you can see. Now, if anybody is annoyed by my glass Z-shell terminal, please speak up. I will unglass it so you can see it better. Is everybody okay with this the way it is?
It looks fine to me, and no one's raising any questions or anything, so I think it looks probably looks okay. Okay.
I just catted the JSON file. That's the result of those serialization functions, which are the last functions that get called in the main file. And you can see here each of those objects. And those are data objects that other people will be able to pull out and work with. Other developers, you know. So this is what we would use to work with. This would be the raw data. and it would be in a nice, these are nice JSON objects. It's not in XML, although with F# you could really write a nice XML file or database. You can write this to SQL. You can write this to a lot of things. If you really wanted to, you could write this to a plain text file. Although I don't know why anybody would want to do that, because there's a lot of other developers that work in different languages that they might have problems accessing the data if it's not in a JSON file or what have you. So I wanted to make it the most accessible possible, and that's what you can see going on there. All those there you go. And what the app will also do, in addition to this, and that's the part where I'm about to embark on refactoring, is we'll take it from there and it will count. It will count each one of these calls, each one of these reports. I say calls, but you know what I mean. I'm talking about a user entering their raw data on what their outcomes were when they tried to get help, either for themselves or on behalf of another for whom they were advocating. And the next stage of this is to figure out how to work this in to the type system and to, with the functions that I have, to count the number of times or the number of total callers to any given particular NGO that would be listed in that data. Like here you see the names of Salvation Army, for example, and Shared Hope. The next part is to be able to count how many callers to those NGOs there are, and out of those, how many were helped, how many were turned away. That is what gives us the clear picture. That's what, when math people like myself say numbers rule the universe, we're not joking. This is one example of how. Because it's hard to argue with the facts. It's hard to argue with the data. It's hard to argue with the numbers. I mean, you can try. You can have fun trying. But it's very hard to do that. Although there are some people out there that will insist that 2 + 2 = 5. And, well, God bless them, but, it's not. 2 and 2 is 4. It's always got to be 4. So that's basically it.
Oh, do you have any planned reports or any examples of reports that you wanted to try to show? And also, once you have those, who would you try to send those to? Do you already have sort of an in terms of like maybe a resource, a government resource, or maybe another NGO that is trusted that can process this data and take action on it? Or is this more of a public sort of like let people know who are trying to reach out, like who best to reach out to, or who their best referrals are gonna be to?
It's actually going to serve multiple purposes here. It's going to let the public know what the score is. Number one, that they can see that, oh gee, Anti-Trafficking NGO ABC over here got $64 million, and yet out of 17,000 survivors or victims that called requesting help because they were homeless and they had nothing but the clothes on their back and they just escaped a really bad situation. But out of 17,000, only 50 got helped. That gives the general public the means to say, wait a minute, some accountability, please. And it also gives other NGOs the ability to do that too. It encourages the NGOs to better police themselves. So that way, when like Polaris, they don't know. Polaris is located in DC. And I know the operator of the one of the operators of the Polaris hotline. Her name's Nicole. And she and I have talked several times. And, and I just gave her an update last week. There was an NGO that was listed in their database to refer survivors to out in Michigan in the Upper Peninsula. And when a survivor-run NGO that's, you know, a trafficking survivor that actually set up her own NGO. When she tried to call that NGO on behalf of a victim, because the victim wasn't in her state, you know, the survivor-run NGO was located out in Utah, and the victim needing help was in Michigan. Polaris had this, you know, a whole whopping two NGOs listed in their resource list of who this victim could go to. And one of them, when the victim called, it wasn't even an NGO. It was some guy that was woken up out of a sound sleep, and he was really groggy, and it was obviously a private phone number. It was not an NGO. You know, there was no answering machine saying, oh, you know, you've reached such and such, our hours are 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., blah, blah, blah. Or for if this is an emergency, please call this toll-free number or anything like that. No, this was obviously apparently a fly-by-night operation that set up shop as a so-called anti-trafficking charity. And it wasn't. It was some dude's private residence. And I immediately got on the horn with Nicole about that and said, you know, the one of the two NGOs out in the Upper Peninsula is not legit. You know, I actually called and investigated this one myself. and I got the guy out of bed. And I said, you know, excuse me, aren't you, you know, I think that it was called the Brethren of Manasseh or something like that. And that's named after a Bible character. Manasseh was, you know, one of the people who Jacob was blessing on his deathbed or whatever. You know, this guy was like, who? What? And I was like, yeah, this is your phone number, correct? And it turned out that, you know, and he was like, well, yeah, that's my phone number, but I don't know nothing about no trafficking. And that's when I took that information back to Nicole, and I said, you need to update your database, you know, because you have a resource in here that's not even, you know, does not exist or is not legit. You know, whether or not this organization got any money, because Polaris actually dispenses money to other NGOs. So that information is pretty helpful. And the other NGO, the second NGO that was available was legit. Unfortunately, they only had space for 6 safe beds. They were only had a capacity for 6 victims. They were at full capacity. So this victim in need of help literally had nowhere to go. And with a prostitution record as a result of being trafficked, guess what? She could not go to the Salvation Army or to one of these shelters for abused homeless women, because those shelters, you know, they serve children. And when you have a record like that as a direct result of being trafficked, you're automatically slapped with a sex offender status for 99 years. That law is starting to change, but it only just is starting to change. There's now 19 states where underage victims of the crime of human trafficking are no longer criminalized and rendered, you know, not just unemployable for life, but rendered unable to get helped at even a homeless shelter. But this only just started in the past few years, and it was because of leaders in the survivor movement speaking out and getting very vocal that this started to change. And it basically boils down to, don't criminalize victims of this crime. This is crazy. You would never criminalize underage victims of any other crime. Why would you criminalize this specific set of victims over here? This is insane. So when we're now up to 19 states where if a 12 or 13-year-old boy or girl who's a victim of the crime of human trafficking, who has, you know, as a result of that incurred you know, an arrest record, that, you know, arrest record, if they're in one of those 19 states, that they're not arrested anymore. They're not treated as a crime, as the criminal. They're treated as the crime victim. In the remaining states, that's not the case. For example, in the state of Texas, if you're a 12 or 13-year-old kid who's, you know, trafficked and gets arrested on prostitution charges, They get slapped with a 99-year sex offender status. That means they can't even get a job at McDonald's until they're 113 years old, because with that on their record, they can't get housing, they can't get jobs, and they can't even get served at a homeless shelter. Lauren Crosson, who heads Rockstar Ministries out in Utah, she herself is a survivor, and she was denied housing. It was minus 10 degrees. And she was in Salt Lake City, and she tried to get into a homeless shelter to get a warm bed for the night. She was a homeless survivor who had fled a horrific situation, and she was turned away. She was literally left, if it wouldn't have been for some Mormons that took her in and felt sorry for her, she would have froze to death out in the street. She would have froze to death under a bridge somewhere. I mean, this is the kind of thing that happens. So when I saw that, with the right access to data and working with information responsibly, we could not only encourage the NGOs that are supposed to be serving this particular demographic to behave in a more responsible and ethical manner, it would also encourage them to police themselves and each other and get them to do the right thing. And it would also provide information to the public to let the public know, well, this one over here is not working with the money they're getting very efficiently. So maybe instead of donating this year to this anti-trafficking charity ABC, I'll donate to anti-trafficking charity XYZ instead, who has done more with their money to help the people that they claim to be helping. So it's to answer your question, and I don't mean to get long-winded about this, that's pretty much what we'd be looking at doing. It would benefit everybody all the way around. Did I answer that sufficiently? Or
yeah, I think so. That was really good. I'm also curious, so I know that this is a project you've had, or you've been trying to work on kind of off and on as you've had different consulting jobs and whatnot going on. What does it take to get this thing sort of wrapped up and into a state where you could deploy it and get it into the hands of people who could start using it, both in terms of to the victims and survivors who could start putting data in, as well as to people who could then take some of the data, the generated raw data, and creating data sets or reports or analytics or something on it?
I definitely welcome collaborators. Because it's a bit much for one person, I think. Like I said, I'm just getting back to my learning F# journey after not having had the opportunity to really, dig into it and savor the flavor. Not to sound corny, but yes, I wanted to save every morsel when I first saw this language. I thought, you talk about Fruit Loops for coders. No, this was chocolate for this engineer here. That was like, oh boy. And I was heartbroken when I had to do other things, because I was, deep down inside, it was like F# is calling me. It's like that snack, those Parmesan, garlic Parmesan wings that are in the fridge in the middle of the night. They call my name, and, Jacqueline, come get me. It was like that, and I really wanted to get back to the F#, and I was really not enjoying a lot of this stuff that I was doing. So I think what I would need to get this up and deployed is I would need definitely to build, I need to delve, to take the time, to have the time to devote to furthering my own coding journey in mastering this language, and also work with other people. And of course, it would also help if I had money to float, my basic bills on and groceries on, so that I could actually devote full time to finishing this app. That I could do, that I would be able to do that, which means I'd have to have my food, my electric, and my internet covered. So that's why I have the GoFundMe. I don't need a lot. I just need enough to survive, to be able to, to get this to deployment. I had some ideas for you know, how maybe this could be monetized. And I don't know what you think of that, but I was thinking along the terms of, you know how when you want to check somebody out and you go to Been Verified or Intellius and you enter the information that you know about the person? Maybe you're somebody that, I mean, there's people that go to online dating sites, for example, with the idea of, you know, they want to meet somebody that they might click with or have something in common with. But with meeting anybody over the internet, there's also an inherent situation that you have to take into consideration of, do you really know that person? It's not the same thing as when you are able to meet them in person, although video chats make it somewhat personalized. It's still not the same thing as being able to observe them in real life. You know, so people are often urged or encouraged to check out potential, you know, potential dates or partners or new friends or whatever on these various different dating sites by doing a background check. You know, because Plenty of Fish has had 2 incidents already where a couple people, I think, they went to meet their what they thought was their dream date, and they ended up murdered. One of them, well, you know, was a situation happened. It was up in Schenectady, New York, which is where Shirley Muldowney, first female drag strip racer, is from. And, you know, that's because the person did not, you know, apparently do their due diligence. They didn't look up to see that this person that killed them actually had a history of violence and a criminal record a mile long of assaults and, you know, burglaries and, you know, not the kind of person you'd want to invite home for dinner and introduce to the family, you know. Those sites that you go to, that people go to, they actually have to pay for a background report, and there's different prices. I think Intellius charges, I think $29.99 for a one-time pass-through. I don't know what Been Verified charges, but I know they charge somewhere near the same, you know, ballpark. I was thinking of a way that this could be monetized to also do the same thing. That that a person wanting a really in-depth breakdown of a particular NGO, such as their financials, who their executive, who their C-levels are, who's their CEO or their president or their director or whatever, and does that person, what kind of background do they have? There's a real example here that I'm going to share with you that comes from, you know, the necessity of this app, actually. And it involved a case in Florida where this guy who he claims that, you know, and he's well backed. I mean, he's well heeled. He's got a crew of guys that are very well heeled. And he came into a Facebook human trafficking survivors support group that's run by survivors. And he was, you know, saying, hey, you know, if you can spare money and pitch in, which is a joke, survivors are the poorest group of the population. But he came into this Facebook group asking these women for money to donate to his charity, to his NGO. And he was saying, I rescue over 200 kids a week. And one of the survivor leaders who was, and I'm not going to mention any names because, you know, I protect, you know, people's identity. But she spoke up and said, you know, Bishop, that's what this guy goes by. And he wears this crazy getup with this mask and this device that actually disguises his voice. It's built into the mask, so you can't, you know, identify him. And she said, well, you know, gee, Bishop, where are you taking all these kids to? There's only 267 safe beds, not safe houses, individual beds within a safe houses. There's only 267 safe beds for underage trafficking victims across the entire United States. So if you're rescuing over 200 of these girls a week, where are you taking them? That guy skedaddled out of that support group on Facebook so fast, faster than you could traverse a bee tree. I mean, you know, he couldn't get out of there fast enough. Because he knew that somebody was onto him. And that's, you know, the sort of thing that, you know, another survivor in that group actually went to a conference where this guy, this Bishop he calls himself, where he spoke at, and he wore the, you know, the same getup with the mask and the voice changing thingy that's built into the mask. And his shirt sleeve kind of creeped up on him that revealed a very distinguishing tattoo. And that survivor sent me the cell phone pic of that tattoo. And as a survivor of human trafficking myself, who was trafficked at age 12 by a criminal organization that was an outlaw motorcycle gang, I instantly recognized that tattoo as being belonging to that of a criminal outlaw motorcycle gang that is a subsidiary corporation that falls under the protection of the Hells Angels. In other words, that guy, Bishop, wasn't on the up and up. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Sorry, my mute button was hidden from me. Yeah, and I think even the monetizing thing makes some sense, because it at least gives a wall of protection around accessing the data, which if it was just available for free, pretty much anyone could get access to it and do good or bad things with it, whereas protecting it with a financial barrier gives you at least a way of you know, restricting or limiting who gets it. And that sort of thing, so.
Yeah, and there's additional things in there too. I mean, you know, a person, you know, just because they pay for the data, that doesn't automatically get them off the hook. They still have to agree to that they're not going to use the data in a bad way to harm people, to harm, you know, innocent people, or, you know, or to pull a stinky. And if they are, you know, found to be doing that, they would open themselves up for, you know, some trouble. So the idea is there has to be a very fine line and a tightrope walked here, and this is difficult because no system in society is perfect, whether we're talking about the financial system, the real estate system, the criminal justice system, or even software development systems. And as engineers, I don't think there's anybody that would disagree with that, you know, because there's no single software programming language that's a silver bullet. You know, nothing is perfect, but what we can do is we can take what we've got and tighten it up and be as meticulous about it as we can possibly be. And one of those subjects deals with the representation of illegal states. Well, you know, there's ways to do that in tightening up how your types are represented. The same deal goes with this. In creating barriers by means of charging for the information, this is how the app will be monetized. And it will be just like, you know, Intellius or been verified. But there's also going to be a situation that, you know, there has to be a safeguard built in, because there's all kinds of kooks and crackpots out there that will say anything to get their 15 minutes of fame. You've got to, you know, definitely protect crime victims from shady characters like Bishop there, who actually got a lot of money. He actually got quite a bit of money from Polaris. And I had to sit down with the people at Polaris about this, and I showed them the tattoo. I mean, I had this discussion. You know, it wasn't one of my favorite conversations to have.
I can't imagine.
You know?
Well, I think our time is about up. We're about at an hour. Jacqueline, this was really fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to do this. And again, for everyone watching, if you're looking for people to hire, Jacqueline is available for hire. I think she's looking for a new opportunity, especially with F#. So if you're doing something there, and also if you're interested in contributing or helping out with the NGO Fraudbuster or the Jackhammer app, as she mentioned, she's looking for collaborators, and we posted the link in a few places where you can go and contribute to the GoFundMe page. So please take a look there. Jacqueline, do you have anything else you want to add before we close out for the day?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I really am honored and grateful for the opportunity to be on your program. Because one of the things I've often heard in other programming community, especially in the object-oriented communities, was that you can't use mathematics or programming to represent or model a real-life problem. Well, I just did that. And I just did that, and I demonstrated that. And I think that whenever someone tells an engineer, well, you can't do this or this is impossible, not to be discouraged, that there just might be a way to do this. And you most certainly can if you have the right tools. F# is a wonderful tool to add to the toolbox. And I cannot praise this tool strongly enough. I actually made an F# song. I mean, I love the language that much. That's all. Sorry.
Well, that's great. Thanks again, Jacqueline. I hope you have a wonderful day, and same to all of you. For those interested, we have another session coming up on Thursday with Enrico Sada, who will be talking about .NET Core, the .NET CLI, and how to use those with F#. And I believe he will also be demonstrating how you can migrate your existing F# libraries and applications over to run on .NET Core. So it could be a really interesting thing to look at. And Jacqueline, this may actually be something interesting for you, since the program you're running might be a good fit for something like .NET Core, depending on the target of what you're going to go for. So.
Oh, definitely. And I wanted to say also that I fully enjoyed the F# virtual conference. I watched several of those presentations twice.
Yes, there was definitely some good content. For those of you who missed it, you can still find the video recordings on Channel 9 for F# Conf. I believe there's probably links from fsharpconf.com as well. So if you missed it, you can still catch the content. This has been recorded, so this will be available shortly on our YouTube feed. So we look forward to any follow-up. Please feel free to contact Jacqueline directly on Twitter @Jacqueline Homan. And have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.